when monarchies are brought down, as this monarchy will be brought down eventually, not by this particularly, but by this sucking up to Republicans, which is going on. And all the people who are really pleased by this are people who hate the throne and who long to see it gone.
Let's ask both of you for your opinions on whether this causes long-term reputational damage to the royal family and how they might reform if that is what is needed. Sonia?
I think it depends on what's more to come out. I think the questions surrounding Prince Andrew and some of the allegations that we've heard, which are only allegations, but they include, for example, that he might have taken trafficked women into Buckingham Palace, potentially. Again, I stress they're only allegations, but there may be questions not just for Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, but for others who may be implicated in the sort of broader royal family network, I suppose. So that is very much kind of an open question, I think, and it could have a huge impact. I suspect that generally amongst the public, there'll be some sympathy for someone like the King, for example, because you know, you can't control who your relatives are. And he clearly has been making increasingly strong statements about this in recent weeks. But, you know, it's just really not good, and it's totally unprecedented in modern times. A member of the royal family being arrested under suspicion of such a serious crime.
Yeah, could it be the death of the royal family? It feels apt that we spoke to the former BBC obituary editor Nick Serple earlier. He told me he wasn't concerned about the long-term future of the royal family.
No, to be honest. I think the royal family has weathered, over the last couple of hundred years, weathered far worse scandals than this one. You know, Queen Caroline being locked out of her coronation by George III, George IV was probably a bigger scandal than this one. I think those who are against the concept of a monarchy will seize on this as something to attack the monarchy with. But I think there was a poll a little while ago that suggested that the public's antipathy to Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor because of what's been going on isn't reflected in antipathy towards the monarchy as an institution. That they've separated the two, if you like.
Has King Charles III done a really good job, Peter, of distancing himself from his brother to the extent that they can walk in separate lanes on this?
No, we discussed it some weeks ago, and I said that debrothering Andrew and taking his titles away would only increase the appetite of the Republicans for more and more humiliation. And I think this is borne out now. Look at this event. Two things occur to me. If he hadn't been a former prince, would anybody have bothered to arrest him on the suspicion of the alleged offences which he's perhaps going to be accused of committing? Secondly, was this arrest in straightforward legal, police or prosecution terms justified by any actual necessity? And why did we have to go through this pantomime of officers turning up at breakfast time on the Sandringham estate? Presumably, of course, nobody had been tipped off that they were going to be there, so everybody found out by accident that they were there. And then he's taken off for 8 hours into police custody and then released, and nothing happens. What was this for? There's so much in police activity these days, and we see it also in the Lucy Letby case and in the recent Netflix documentary in which the horror of her second arrest and the misery visited on her home by that were actually recorded by the police on cameras, and these recordings given to the television company. There seems to be a certain amount of performativeness, to use a term much favoured by the left, in all this behaviour. And the other thing, Melanie MacDonald has written a rather good piece in this online Spectator, pointing out that the two words which were missing from anything which Charles said about the arrest were "my brother."
Yes.
As I say, I use the term debrothering.
Yes.
There actually seems to have been a decision to pretend in some way that Andrew and Charles are not related. He's no longer a member of the royal family. He's been given a new name, which I refuse to use because it's ridiculous. And not because I'm in any kind of sense of supporter of his, but because I really dislike.
Are you just calling him
business of
Andrew,
renaming
Peter?
and unpersoning people.
Okay, so how are you calling him?
Well, I carry on calling him Prince Andrew. That's what he is. Why shouldn't I? I mean, I will not be told by some palace bureaucrat what I can and cannot call somebody I've always called Prince Andrew. It's just annoys me. I do not like the renaming of people and things against their will. The French.
Well, he
Republican
willfully gave up his title,
started to refer to Marie Antoinette as the widow Capet before chopping off her head. This is what people do as when monarchies are brought down, as this monarchy will be brought down eventually, not by this particularly, but by this sucking up to Republicans, which is going on. And all the people who are really pleased by this are people who hate the throne and who long to see it gone. Other people are saying, oh, well, it may be a brilliant political move or whatever, but they don't really understand the depth of and breadth and length and height of what's going on here. The dragging down of the royal family in these events is colossal and irreversible, and will lead in a not very long time to the getting rid of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, you say that there is a performative element to this, Peter.
Well, who could deny it, honestly?
Well, look, in terms of the arrest on suspicion of misconduct in a public office, and that is the only thing that the former Prince Andrew. I feel like I've been caught in your doom loop of calling him Prince Andrew. Now that Andrew Mountbatten, yeah, exactly, ha ha me. But the only allegation, as was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in a public office, and that relates to the alleged sharing of confidential material by the former police.
But why arrested?
By the former
What's
Prince.
the point of an arrest? They didn't have a charge.
Presumably they had
no
enough.
charge followed.
To arrest him.
He wasn't skipping the country. What was the arrest for?
Well, it's completely different. The test for arresting is to aid an investigation. It's completely different to the test
Well, how
for
did they
charging.
aid the investigation?
The evidentiary threshold for charging
Because
is
they wanted
much
to
higher
interview
than for
him,
arrest.
probably.
But why should
They could interview him without arresting him. You don't have to arrest someone to interview
this
them.
country, if they'd arrested somebody else because of the stage that they're at under in their investigations, and they wanted to interview him while he was under arrest, and that would have applied to any other citizen, why should it not apply to Andrew, and I will use his name, Mountbatten-Windsor?
Well, also, Peter, if he was just there without being arrested, he could have walked out at any point, and you got the feeling that it was most.
What would they have done if he'd done that on this occasion? What was the next?
Well, they then would have had to do it all over again, wouldn't they? Presumably.
Do you really think, Kate, that if they'd come to him and said, "We'd like to interview you about malfeasance in public office or whatever it is," he'd have said no? Do you think that they would have to compel him to do so? Do they need to turn up mob-handed with a fleet of motor cars at breakfast time to do so? How was it that the media found out about it? Of course, doubtless because of their immense acuity and
he
their
should be
ability to
testifying
observe everything. But
yeah.
it's so plainly a performative action that there isn't any point in arguing about it. It had no judicial, no police, no legal purpose.
You're not
have been fulfilled by going into his new cottage and saying, "We'd like to talk to you about these things." He didn't need to arrest him, and yet they did.
Well,
and so much of what
had they not arrested him, he could have walked out of that police station at any point.
I live in the area of the Thames Valley Police, who I believe were at the centre of this event, and try and get them to take any action about anything that's going on. But they're straight in there with an arrest of the.
Of course, it had to be done properly,
why
Peter,
would that be?
because he's a public figure. And presumably,
Because he's a public figure to get arrested.
Well, no, there is extra focus because he's a public figure.
I think the argument is that he was treated like any
other person, and
But he wasn't. The Thames Valley Police are totally uninterested in almost all the crime that takes place in that area. They pay no attention to it at all. But they come and arrest Prince Andrew.
No,
well, misconduct in public office is a really serious offence.
Yeah, it is, and also, Peter, we cannot with authority talk about the actions of Thames Valley Police with all other arrests confidently because we don't know.
See how many police forces are involved in this? Wiltshire Police are now involved. It'll be the Rutland Police next.
Well, because Peter,
Jeffrey Epstein's aeroplane flew over Rutland once.
Well, look,
they're all piling in.
There is a very wide breadth of allegations against Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor.
Okay, well, and pursue them then, but there's no need to arrest him. There's never any need to.
Well, okay, but he's just been arrested for allegations relating to him sharing confidential information with Jeffrey Epstein whilst he was a trade envoy. So whilst he was working on behalf of the government. All the other police forces are looking at other issues, okay? Essex Police are looking at flight logs into Stansted, for example. Gordon Brown also announced today that he'd submitted another 5-page dossier of evidence. So there is lots of information coming to light. We can't judge the actions of Thames Valley Police because we don't know, but they had enough to want to bring him in, to arrest him, which compels him to stay at that police station and answer all of their questions. And the other option was that he turned up with a lawyer, answered a few questions and then picked up and went, which would have been a complete waste of police time and would have dragged this out even further.
Why would it be a waste of police time?
Oh, because they wouldn't have been able to have all their questions answered.
Are you aware, Kate, that whether Prince Andrew had a lawyer with him during during this arrest period?
I don't know, but
I would assume so.
Well, I would have thought so.
Yeah, me too.
Certainly,
So
one was called in very quickly.
Of arresting him?
Because it compels him to remain at the police station until the police feel that they've conducted.
Is he going to bust out?
Well,
was he really going to bust out if they'd come to him normally and said, "We'd like to talk to you"? Was he going to jump out of the window?
The other thing to mention is that this is the first arrest in the UK connected to the Epstein files. We know that Peter Mandelson had his home searched. There was no arrest there. So this does have significance because it's a very high-profile case. It's a very high-profile person, albeit sullied in many people's eyes. But it also relates to a very hot topic. And so then maybe you'd say, well, the police are best advised to treat this with seriousness when you take all of that into concern. Peter, you think this will lead to and is part of the downfall of the royal family?
In the end, yes, it'll help along the way. Yeah.
Sonia, to get clarity from you on that, can the royal family ride this out? Can King Charles decouple from his brother in this way, or is there a permanent stain?
I think it will be difficult, but I think if it ends and begins and ends, I should say, with Andrew, then yes, I do think the royal family will survive it. I think the question, as I was saying earlier, was if through the course of investigating the allegations about Andrew, other questions, more broader questions, start to be asked about the institution of the royal family.